So next up, we have Ying, who's providing us with the presentation, Self-Administered Web-Based Cognitive Testing, Does Environmental Distraction Matter? And Ying is a research scientist at CIPHER. Her research interests include innovations in behavioral statistics and psychometric theories and their application in aging-related research. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jill. And also thank you, Amanda, for really setting the stage for this talk. So here we're going to dive deeper in looking to the environmental distractions or influences around the self-administered cognitive testing. This is a joint work with our colleagues in the US team. And we especially want to thank Ari Captain for his leadership of the bigger project in which our study is a small part of. So Amanda already sets the stage of why is it important to kind of study the cognitive testing in the large scale internet surveys. So here, the problem we face, the hurdle we face here is the lack of standardization because of the self-administration nature of the cognitive testing in the internet surveys. It's different. It's very different from the traditional testing in which the test was often given by the trained professionals and in a very well-controlled environment. For example, in a quiet room or in a lab or doctor's office. So any environmental distractions could potentially put a threat to the test accuracy because the excessive measurement error or biases. So in our study, we look into three aspects of the environmental influences. One is location, in which the testing takes place. For example, whether it's at home, at work or school, in a public space, riding a car or other transportation, or walking outside. The second aspect is other activities the participants is involved while completing the test. For example, talking to others, listening to music or podcast, watching TV, playing a game, following content online, texting or checking emails. Well, if we were having an in-person meeting, at this point I would stop and ask for a vote from the room. But now you can still think about your answers and we will see the results very soon. The third aspect we look into is whether the participants is interrupted by anything during the testing. So it's a yes, no answer here. We use two cognitive tests in our study. One is the stop and go switching task, which assesses executive functioning. It was originally developed by for telephone administration and used in the midlife in the United States or MIDA study. The other one is called the figure identification task, which assesses perceptual speed. It was originally developed as a paper pencil test used to study cognitive aging. Both tests involve very simple tasks that everyone should be able to complete and get correct if they were given sufficient enough time. So the cognitive ability over here is assessed by their response time, which is presumably more sensitive to any influential environmental influences or distractions. So we also use the correctness, overall correctness, not to score people, but instead to screen out the inattentive responses. So a respondent would give a score if they achieve at least 70% of correctness. This is just a quick screenshot of demonstration of what the tasks are. For the stop and go switch task, the participants are asked to either press S or G when they see the word red or stop, red or green, sorry. So there are two sets of trials generating 4 different scores. In the first set of trials, they're supposed to press S, stop, if they see red, and go or green, the go or G when they see green. That's what we refer to as a normal baseline. So in the second set, we reverse the rules. So they're supposed to press S when they see green, and then when they press G when they say when they say red, when they see red. That's called reverse baseline. The third set of the trials are just alternating the orders of those two conditions. So it creates some trials that has the same rule, use the same rule as the previous trial, Those trials, we call them as non-switch trials. And there are some trials, they have different rules as their previous trials. So that's where we call the switch trials. So the scores of the SGST task come from the median response score for each of the 4 type trials. And for the figure identification, the respondent will be provided with a target picture and then 5 different options. So they're asked to identify what out of the 5 actually matches the target picture. The primary score for the figure identification is number of correctly identified figures in 3 minutes, which is a time limit. And then we also look into 2 secondary scores. One is a % of figures identified incorrectly in all 60 trials, or the median response time for all accurate trials. For each of the testing, before the testing, we instruct the participants to set aside uninterrupted time. And after the testing, we survey about the environmental influences that I just described earlier. The sample we use come from Understanding America study. So we invited all the active panel members to participate. Roughly about 7,000 completed the test. So once we screen out, use the 70% rule to screen out the inattentive responses, we have a sample of about 6,100 for SGST and 6,700 for Fig ID. The general composition of the sample has a median age of 50, which ranges from 18 to over 100 years old. And about 60% are females, 65% are non-Hispanic white, 8% are non-Hispanic black, and 15% are Hispanic. And 43% of the sample had a bachelor degree or higher, and about 60% has a household income of $50,000 or more. This is the first set of the results where we show the distribution of the environmental influences. So as you see here, about 90% of the sample, they report they did the test while they were at home. Well, and then about 12 to 13% reported they were interrupted during the test. And about the other activities that were engaged while doing the test, well, the number one, I don't know if you guess it right, the number one and the most popular one is watching TV. About 15% people are doing that. And the second winner are listen to music or podcast or talking to others. About 77% to 8% people are doing that for each of them. And then the texting or checking emails, following content on internet, play another game. Those are more rare, they're rarer to happen. Then we next we look into the association between the environmental influences and the cognitive scores. Specifically, we use the environmental influences, those predictors, to predict the cognitive scores while controlling for age. This is for SGST. So as you see here, well, we see a very strong effect and quite consistent effect for being interrupted during the test. So if you remember, all of the scores for SGST are response times. So larger, that means like poor cognitive functioning. So being interrupted actually is associated with the cognitive testing here, poor cognitive functioning. And then watching TV is associated with the poor functioning on the non-switch and switch trials. And texting or checking emails are associated with the poor functioning in the switch trials. For the Fig ID, well, just a quick reminder, for the Fig ID score, because that's a number of correctly identified figures within a time limit. So the lower of the number, the poorer of the functioning. And for the other 2 criteria, it's always the higher the score, well, that means the poor functioning here. So if you look at the results over here, being interrupted again is associated with the poor functioning on Fig ID score as the medium, and also the median response time. And watching TV is associated with a poor functioning in all 3 dimensions. And then texting or checking emails is associated with poor functioning on the Fig ID score and the median response time. And then playing another game is also associated with the poor functioning reflected by the FIG ID score. We also look into the association between the environmental influences and age. So in other words, we want to know, do different people with different ages, they somehow are influenced, have those distractors, well, differently. So here we find the younger ages are more likely to, taking the test away from home and being interrupted and then engage in other activities. But those effects are relatively small, and we do not think it's meaningful to affect the relationship between age and cognitive scores. Just to summarize, we see in our study, most of people are, even if they were told they can complete the test in any location, the vast majority chose to complete the test at home. Well, this could be a side effect of that our data collection occurred during the pandemic, so between November 2020 and April 2021. So after the economy opens, so this might be slightly different. We find that a non-trivial number of participants were interrupted during the test or engaged in simultaneous activities that could be distracting. Specifically, those environmental factors is also significantly associated with the lower cognitive test scores. So here we try to put our kind of numbers into perspective, and by anchoring the performance difference, the reduction in the cognitive performance, to the age difference that one would expect to see, given the on the same cognitive decline, basically given the age increase. So for the SGST, the being interrupted reduced participant performance by about 0.09 to 0.15 seconds on average. That corresponds to a performance reduction expected for about 4 to 9 years increase of age. For FIG ID, the performance reduction is roughly about equivalent to about 3 years increase of age. While our study shows the environmental distractions have a non-trivial yet modest impact, but then the question is, what do we do next? Well, we definitely should think more about how to improve attention and reduce distraction in the internet-based surveys. One thing that we started to implementing is to ask the participants to positively affirm, to actively confirm they are in a good environment. So that's something we're trying to explore more. And then any questions are welcome.
Thanks, Ying. All right. Preeti?
Hi, Ying. Thanks. Thank you, Jill. I was just wondering if you could clarify if there were any incentives in terms of any dollar provided to complete these cognitive tests in these population-based surveys, or was it kind of voluntary basis?
Yes, well, so this is a part of our regular Understanding America study survey. So I believe Jill will know better. I believe we just use the regular incentives, which is
we pay them $20 for every 30 minutes of survey time. So that's prorated for however long the survey that they're taking is. So that includes for these cognitive tests, they're paid at that level.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we have thought of, we do as much as we can. We're asking people to set aside time. They could come back if they need to do it at a better time, but it's sort of hard to control that, as we talked about before. You just don't have that any control over what the environment is. I think really maybe don't you thinking like what we end up needing is just to know that, so that it can be part of the analysis. Like if we know that they've had interruptions, or we know that they're on away from home or whatever, that will just have to end up being part of the analysis.
I agree, but I think it depends on the purpose of the analysis. So if the goal is to kind of do the overall, for example, the group average or something, I think it could be really helpful. But if the goal is to really, for example, to build a trajectory for the individual. So for example, if you want to study the cognitive decline, then I think how to adjust becomes a more complicated question.
Sure. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, all of the presenters. I think this was an interesting session. And the last one, we still have a lot of people here. Thank you so much for staying with us through the conference for the last session. And I look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow at day 2.